All right, guys. So what we're going to talk about is the resurrection. Sergio talked about it, and this is something like Christianity is known for. Like Christianity in its religion has a leader who rose again from the grave. No other religion really has that. There are some things that are maybe similar to it, but unlike and unique is the presentation of Jesus Christ in the resurrection. You've never seen this before. No religion is really paramount and pivotal on that one single point. Now the question is the why. The why is that so important? Well, maybe you've never encountered death, and I hope that you haven't. I know that you will. It's inevitable that it'll happen to you and those that you love. But see, death is this just defeating thing. It's this disabling thing. Because death comes with it a lethal friend called doubt. Now, when I was young, when I was about 12 years old, I experienced death of my father, the person that I loved the most. That I loved him, I endeared our relationship, I prized it, you could say I worshiped it. I put it on a level that it shouldn't have been. I loved my dad, but it was more than that. I adored him, he could do nothing wrong. I didn't accept really his failures, even though that they were blatantly out there in front of me. But my dad was so pivotal and important in my life that I worshiped that, you could even say. I would worship that. And I cherished that, and I kind of put blinders onto what the reality of that situation really was. And he got taken away kind of at the result of a couple bad choices of his from an overdose, and that was hard when I was 12. And I remember doubt just kind of punching me in the face when I was really young, and just I didn't know what to do with these things. Well, right around that same time, I had a cousin, just a little bit older than me. Her name was Nikki, and Nikki was hanging out with the wrong people. She was hanging out with the wrong crowd, and Nikki was a good girl. She was a good girl. Yeah, she made some choices that probably weren't smart, but, you know, when you're teenagers, you do. Heck, you do it now. I do it now, right? You're exploring. You're trying to figure out life, figure out who the friends are and stuff like that. Well, she got caught up in a situation that she did not know what she was landing in. She was basically invited over to this friend's house. She snuck out, and she goes to this apartment, and in this, actually, I think it was a motel, a two-story motel that Nikki was at. And there were these two guys, and they were basically stealing stuff and selling it again, doing some kind of scheme. And these guys were druggies. Maybe they were just doing their, stealing things to support their habits, something like that. We've probably heard this story. It might have been your story. So these guys were doing those things, and Nikki's over with one of her girlfriends. She's there, and for some reason, these guys just start hallucinating, and they're doing some serious stuff, I don't know what it was, but some serious stuff, and they start to get paranoid. You've ever been around addicts, or you've ever been an addict, you know what I'm talking about. You get paranoid, everybody's out to get you and all that stuff. The more serious hallucinogens you get into, the more paranoid you get. So these guys got paranoid, and they thought Nikki, who's new, was a snitch. She was a snitch, meaning that she was basically there kind of undercover to report them to the cops. When you're in that kind of criminal behavior, the worst thing is a snitch, right? You don't want to get caught. You want to continue what you're doing, make the profits that you're making, right? That's what you want to do. So in their paranoia and their hallucination, they thought Nikki was this person, she was a threat, she needed to die. And so they murdered her. They murdered my cousin. They murdered her. They, stabbed her and threw her out of a window. And I remember going to Christmas at Nikki's, right? And I remember playing. She had this little pig, and we played this pig. And I remember those happy moments, right? But as a kid, certain things are hard to handle. Like when Grandma and Grandpa died, that's tough, right? But they're getting older. But my dad wasn't 50 when he died. He was in his 40s. And Nikki was a teenager when her life was taken away from her. And I remember all of these situations kind of spiraling in my head, and doubt came in. Now, you know exactly what I'm talking about if you've been confronted with death. You know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a moment, maybe it's a casket closed or whatever, condition of the death was. Closed or open, and if you look there, and as you're looking at that body, I remember looking at my dad's body and thinking he's just asleep. Right, he's just asleep. And if you've ever been in this situation, you have the same feelings. Your mind just can't wrap around that this person is never going to get up again. But I remember as a kid rethinking everything I've ever thought in my life, because that's what doubt does. Like, what am I doing with myself? What decisions have I made? How close have I got to my dad's bad, unwise choices? How close have I got to being around the wrong people like Nikki? How close have I gotten to death? What is my life? And if my life was to end quick and sudden like my father's, or taken from me like Nikki's, well, what would it stand for? What would be the worth, the value, the sum total of who I am? What would stand on my tombstone? What would be kind of my remembrance? What would be my legacy? And is there a legacy worth living? And should I look at these deaths as permanent? Right, that was the biggest doubt that crept in. Am I ever going to see that man again? Right, that was it as a kid, as a 12-year-old boy. That's the man that I treasured the most. That was the center of my life. Improperly, I think that was wrong. Right? I idolized him too much, like I already said. But I want to know, am I going to get that back again? Or is it inevitable? Is it permanent? And the permanence of death that you feel. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've been to a funeral, you stared at a casket, or anything like that. The permanence of it never leaves you. It's just unshake. You can't get it off you, man. You can't shake it off. You can't drown it out. You can't drink enough. You cannot distract your mind enough. It's just there. And all these doubts just build and build and build into just this towering thought that you can't move away from your mind. And this is exactly what happened to the disciples. Right? The followers of Jesus. I mean, you think about some of the claims that this Jesus guy made. I mean, he came to a tomb and told a man to walk out of it. His name was Lazarus. In John chapter 11, he said, "Come out of the tomb, Lazarus," calls my name, and this man who's been dead for days then wakes up. And then he says to everybody around him, "If you believe in me, even though you die, you will live. You will beat death." And he says that he's the Son of God, not meaning that he's just related in a family tree, but that he is God, very God. He is God and man at the same time. He created the heavens of the earth, and he will call everybody to a reckoning, a day of judgment, and he will collapse all things, build things new. That's who this guy said he was. But the disciples saw a scene that was totally contrary to what they were hearing about this Jesus guy, what he was saying. They saw him die. They saw him die on a cross. They saw him bleed. They saw his body hemorrhage. They saw blood just flowing from his just ripped up and shredded body. Now, how do those two minds come together? How do those two thoughts, Son of God, defeater of death, but he dies? And so doubt just rushes in their minds, floods their emotion, enables their limbs. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to move. They're just crippled by this deafening thought of, he's dead. He's dead. And I want to show you this doubt. This is in John chapter 20. This is in John chapter 20. There's this guy named Thomas. He's a follower of Jesus. Pretty cool guy. You see, but Thomas misses out on a really cool occasion. Because Jesus raises from the dead after he was killed, meets in a room with his disciples. It says the doors are locked. Jesus jumps in there. How does that work? Did he go through the chimney? No, he's not Santa Claus. Some people say he materialized kind of like a ghost. I don't know what happened. He's the Son of God. He entered any way he wanted to. SWAT team through the window, Santa through the chimney, or just broke down the door like the police. I don't know how it works, but he got into the room. And he gets into the room, and he sees these men crippled and enabled by their doubt because he had died. They had just saw this a few days ago. And he says, "Peace be with you. Peace be with you." And they see him, his physical body right there before them. But Thomas misses this. He's probably at a wedding, maybe at a birthday party. Who knows where Thomas is at? He's not there. He didn't go to church. This is why you shouldn't miss church, because you might miss the resurrection. But Thomas then jumps into this scene. He hears that Jesus is alive, but he's got to wait a whole week. A week. He's got to wait a week. So disciples get to see Jesus, then Jesus leaves. They all come up to him. "Thomas, you're not going to believe what we saw." Thomas has got to wait a week. That's the worst week ever. But then again, the doors are locked for fear of the Jews, the Bible tells us. Jesus jumps in, again, I don't know, chimney, window, door, who knows. Jumps in the room, says, peace be with you, and Thomas is right there. Check this out. This is what Jesus and Thomas say to one another. This is John chapter 20, verse 24. It says, now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the hands and the marks of the nails and place my finger into the marks of the nails, wow, I'm jumping around like crazy. To place my hands into his side, I will not believe. What is he saying? I think we kind of give Thomas a bad time, right? Like if you've been around church, and this may be your first time, so I don't expect you to know this, but you've been around church, we call Thomas something. We don't call him the twin, we call Thomas the doubter. Doubting Thomas. But think about it for a moment. If you just saw your buddy get shot, like 50, like 9 times, you know what I mean? If you just saw your boy get shredded by bullets, and you checked his pulse, and the dude was dead, you saw him go off, not in the ambulance, but in whatever they take dead people in, the morgue, black car, the Batmobile, whatever it is. They take him away. You saw that happen. You went to the gravesite. You saw the thing, right? You saw everything. The dude is dead. But then your buddy comes up a couple days later and says, you're not going to believe it. Fiddy's alive. And he's got a new album. He preaches with a bulletproof vest. I don't know why, right? I'm just kidding. But then they tell you that your buddy's there. Would you be like, what? You're crazy. What'd you see on Instagram? It was a crazy filter. He was really a dead body. Right? You would have doubts too, and you should have doubts. You don't play around with this. You don't just believe this. We're talking about the most significant event in human history. You better want some proof. And we can't really blame Thomas because you know what? Thomas is just asking for what the disciples already had. So even if the disciples kind of give him a hard time, like, just believe, Thomas, just believe. Thomas can look at him like, dude, I wasn't there. He jumps into the room, shows you his wounds, shows you that he's real, eats with you. I didn't get to see that. You want me to just trust you guys? No, I need to see it. I need to see it. See, I think Thomas was a realist, not a doubter. I think he's a realist. He knows the pivotal moment right now that stands before him. Now check this out. Thomas is mentioned a couple times in the gospel, and I just want to show you that Thomas isn't just this like cowardly dude. Thomas isn't some guy who's just thrown around wishy-washy by doubt or fear or anything like that. This is when Jesus was hanging out with these guys way before he was ever killed. And Jesus says, hey, I want to go somewhere. This is after he's raised Lazarus from the dead, the guy I was talking about who'd been dead for days, and Jesus called him out by name, and he comes out of the tomb. After that happens, or actually right before that happens, right when Lazarus dies, in between them going to where they are to see Lazarus, in between there, the disciples are worried, dude, we can't go there. You have a bad rep. People want to kill you. That's what they say. And this is what Thomas says, right? Doubting Thomas, as we've called him. This is what Thomas says in John chapter 11, verse 16. It says this, so Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Does that sound like a doubter? That dude's just real, right? Jesus says, we're going. And he's like, all right, if I die, I die. I'm going to roll with you, Jesus. Right? That's what he says. Ride or die, Jesus, ride or die. That's what he says. Like, we're going. We're going to do this thing. That's who Thomas is. Thomas is just a realist. Now, sometimes Thomas doesn't understand things. They're too complex for him. Check this out. This is another occasion of our dude Thomas. This is in John chapter 14, verse 1. Jesus is teaching like this crazy teaching about heaven and all these things, and Thomas just doesn't get it. Listen to what Jesus says first. This is in John chapter 14, verse 1. It says, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many rooms. And if it were not so, I would have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you. Verse 3. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and I will take you to myself. And where I am, there you will be also. And you know the way to where I am going. Now, Jesus is talking about heaven, and Thomas is not, he's a concrete thinker right there in front of him. Jesus, you want me to go over here? All right, ride or die with you, I'm going. But Jesus starts talking about heaven, and Thomas is just lost. Jesus is saying, I'm going up here. I'm going to be a construction worker for a little bit in heaven. I'm going to build you this awesome room in my Father's house. It's going to be cool. I wouldn't have told you about this if I was lying. And I'm going to come back, and I'm going to get you, and the room's going to be all done. It's kind of countertops and nice floors, like all that stuff. Right? This is what Thomas says, verse 5. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going. Before he knew, Jesus pointed, we're going that direction. Thomas said, okay, I'm going, let's go. But then Jesus points in like this weird direction, like, I'm going to go over here and over here. And Thomas is like, just point, Jesus, and I'll go, even if we die. He says, how can you say, we don't know where you're going? How can we know the way? Thomas is a realist. And faced in the same situation, I would be exactly like Thomas. I mean, wouldn't you? I mean, we're talking the most defeating thing that all of us have to face. Some of us will face depression in our life, it's true. Some of us will face anger. Some of us will face alcoholism. Some of us will face temptations with lust, whether it be pornography or fornication, what the Bible calls sex outside of marriage. Some of us will be tempted in all those different areas. But all of us will die. All of us. Every single one of us. We'll all face it. It'll all hit us. It's the most pivotal thought, really, in our history. What happens after death? And how does that change my life? And so Thomas wants to be absolutely certain. So check out what Jesus says to Thomas when he's hanging out with him. This is back in John chapter 20. Verse 26, like I said, 8 days later, his disciples were inside again. This is John chapter 20, verse 26. And Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, seeing Thomas right there, knowing his doubts. Now, if doubting was wrong, if calling your beliefs into question is wrong, Jesus has a primary opportunity to kind of smack Thomas around. To say, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? Be a man of faith. Be strong. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say that. And you know what? We don't say that here at Illuminate. If you have doubts, this is the safest place for them. If you have questions, your life group is the safest place for them. If you're like, Paul, I don't know if I believe anymore. I've seen some stuff in my life. I've done some stuff in my life, and I don't know if what the Bible says is true. Get those questions out. Because just like Thomas, that information, those answers, those questions are pointing you to the most pivotal principle in your life. So don't stay in doubt. Don't stay there. Vocalize it. You're not going to hurt me or offend me if you say, Paul, I listened to all your messages and I believe none of them. That's fine. I'm okay with that. But don't stay there. Explore it. Get the evidence. Get the proof. And this is what Thomas does, and this is what Jesus accepts. Thomas wants proof. So Jesus gives him proof. Jesus says, put your fingers here and see my hands. This is exactly what Thomas wanted, right? Put your hand and place it on my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. And Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. His doubt led him to explore. Jesus welcomes the doubt, gives him the evidence, and there's only one conclusion in Thomas's mind. My Lord, my God. But this next part bugs me, and it should bug you. Because check what Jesus says. This is verse 29. Jesus said to him, have you believed? This is a question. I think it's a rhetorical question, meaning he's not expecting Thomas to answer it. A rhetorical question, he's just introducing a question to move the train of thought along. Check this out, this is what he says. Have you believed because you have seen me? The answer is yes, of course he has. And Jesus says this, blessed are those who have not seen yet believe. Okay, totally unfair. Right? Totally unfair. Disciples got to see the risen Jesus Christ. Thomas waited 8 days. And yeah, that's a long time, but he got to see the risen Christ. I have never seen the risen Christ. And you expect me to believe? To put my life at stake for this truth? And you don't give me what the disciples had? You don't give me what Thomas had? How is that fair? How is that fair? And you may be asking the same question. Paul, I'm in doubt. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. It's unfair. It's unfair to ask me to believe, to risk my life on this proposition that I can't even verify with my eyes. And you know what? I have to say, part of that's true, man. Part of that's true. And you know what? Part of that was true for me. Right? Facing the death of my dad, facing Nikki's murder, all those things were just spinning around in my head, like I said. And I knew about God. Like, I knew about the Bible. I knew about Jesus. I'd gone to church. I'd done all that stuff. And in my mind, I thought, I want it to be real. Right? I mean, who doesn't? Who doesn't want it to be real? I want it to be real. Like, I don't want to face death and be scared of it. I don't want to look at a funeral and be scared of it. I don't want that. I want to walk through just a couple reasons. It's the only time you're probably ever going to see me go into a list. If you were to ask the question, Paul, why should I believe in the resurrection? Let me just give you a few. Okay, first is this. Why should I believe? I can't see Jesus. I can't see the nails. I can't see that. Why should I believe? Well, there are several things that make this hard to be a lie, hard to be a hoax, hard to be a conspiracy. I'm just going to shoot these out for you. And then I'm going to give you the one that changed my mind. Here's the first one. First is, Jesus predicted it. Jesus predicted his resurrection. Which means Jesus basically set up the hardest hoax on the planet. Let me explain. It'd be like me telling you, believe me, illuminate. I'm a man of God. I have seen things that you haven't seen. I know the future. I'm going to guess the next Super Bowl champion. Okay, it's like 1 in 32 odds. Okay, there you go. That's not that risky of a proposition. Maybe I get it right, then you all believe, you start giving me money or whatever the scam is. But the higher the probability, the harder I make the event to predict, I'm putting my reputation on the line. And what does Jesus Christ do? Jesus says, I'm going to raise from the dead. I'm going to do something that nobody has ever done in the history of the world. That's what I stake my claim on. If this was all a hoax, if this was all a power play, if this was all just to get poor people's money, if this whole book was that, why would you have Jesus say that? Now you have to collaborate this whole conspiracy. If Jesus just didn't say that, Christianity would be way easier to sell to people. But Jesus makes it very hard for us. He predicts his own resurrection. The second thing is this. Jesus was really dead. And you're probably like, what? What does that have to do with anything? Well, if Jesus never died, he didn't have to raise from the dead, right? Maybe that's what happened. Maybe just Jesus got beat up really, 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 really bad. And then he kind of just shook it off, got some medical attention for 3 days and popped out like, I'm healed. Right? That could explain the resurrection, but think about it. Does that even work? Is that even close? No, it's not even close. Jesus was beaten with a whip 39 times, 39 lashes. With metal, with teeth, with bones, all these things woven into these whips, ripping his back apart. You know why they did it 39 times? Because if you did it 40-something, he'd probably die. Jesus was in critical condition before he ever even got to the cross. And then they took spikes that are about 5 to 7 inches long, and they put them in his hands and in his feet. Then they took a spear to Jesus after several hours of being crucified, bleeding, bloody, and they slammed it under his ribcage. And when they pulled the spear out, the Bible describes that water and blood flowed. Now that water, what they would have seen as water, was probably the fluid around Jesus' heart, which means the spear went through his lung and hit his heart. People don't survive those wounds. But see, then they took this body and embalmed it, which means they put all this anointment and perfume and bandages, about 75 pounds of bandages, wrapped Jesus up, put him in a tomb, rolled the stone away, and then sealed it so he would have suffocated if he was still in there. Now, nobody in history can survive that. And even if he did, he would have come out just messed up. Right? He would have been all, he would be on life support. Who would believe in that guy? Jesus really died. Another one is this. The message starts in Jerusalem. Now, why is that a big deal? Think about the World Series that just happened. You had the Giants, that's my team, just beat the Kansas City Royals. And you know where they beat them? In Kansas City. Basically, Jesus, this whole story about the resurrection, starts in the city where Jesus died. If you're going to start a lie, start it over here. Don't start it over here. It'd be like me going to Kansas City the day after the World Series. Going to the stadium and say, guys, you won. Can you imagine? You won the World Series. You haven't won since 1985. Oh, this is great. They'd be like, no, bro, we were here. Bumgarner killed us. The Giants are awesome. And I'd be like, gotcha. You don't start a lie where the event happened. You go over here. But all the preaching of Jesus Christ starts in Jerusalem. If you're going to make this elaborate hoax, this giant lie, start it somewhere else. The disciples should have gone to like Uganda and started this lie. But they preach in Jerusalem. Another one is this. Women. Women are the first witnesses to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. If you're writing a story in the ancient Near East in first century Palestine, women don't matter. Now that's bad. I'm not saying it's good. Don't be like, Paul's a hater. That's not what I'm saying. But they wouldn't trust you in court. Your testimony wasn't really good. So if you're going to contrive a lie, like get some credible men to be verifiable sources. Don't let women be the first ones. You want your lie to look good, not questionable. Okay, another one is this. Paul writing at the same time that these events happened, with all the witnesses around, Paul makes this claim in the book of Corinthians. He says, 500 people saw Jesus after he died. And they're still alive. Paul says, go talk to them. Oh, you know how hard that makes the lie to be? I got to pay off 500 people. Right? And he says, 500 people saw him on 12 to 15 different occasions. Oh, you just made this thing so hard to sell. The last one is this. The tomb is always argued to be empty. The Romans, the Jews, hated Jesus. He was a political anomaly that they couldn't handle. He was a renegade. He was a radical. He was messing things up, messing up the status quo. He was riling everybody up. He was saying that he was a king. He was a threat. So you know what the easiest thing to do is if you claim you rose from the dead and you didn't? Take his body, parade it around Jerusalem. Problem solved, Christianity extinguished. But you know what historical data tells us? That the Jews and the Romans maintained this consistent position that the tomb was empty and the disciples stole the body. That's not Bible, that's history. They said he stole it. Now, all those things are good. And I started to learn all those things, but that didn't convince me. That didn't convince me. You know what convinced me? Is the one I could feel convinced me. This was the most convincing thing for me. Check this out. Sergio talked about it. So the last passage we're going to go to is this. If you keep reading in the book of John, there's this encounter with this guy named Peter. Peter denied Jesus 3 times before he died. Peter was a good guy, man. He was a good guy. He was always stepping up for Jesus. He was the only guy to fight for Jesus when Jesus was taken in the garden. He was the only one there, and he lashed out with a weapon, hoping to fend the enemies of Jesus off, and Jesus stopped him. He was the only one that followed Jesus probably all the way to his trial. But as he's standing there near a charcoal fire, he gets some questions. One of the questions is from a servant girl, maybe a teenager. Says, dude, you know this Jesus guy who's being tried right now. You're one of them. And 3 times he gets questions, and 3 times he says, no, I don't know him. He's a coward. He's all talk and no walk. He says, Jesus, I'm going to fight for you. He lashes out in company of other disciples. But when it really comes down to it, he's not willing to die. He's not willing to die, even though he believes deeply in Jesus. But check this out. Peter is hanging out. He's seen Jesus. This is in John chapter 21, verse 15. It says this. And when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, tend to my sheep. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved. 3 times he denied, 3 times he's asked the question, do you really love me? So Peter's grieved. I bet he thinks in his mind, he knows I'm a fraud. But then Peter says this, Lord, you know everything. You're God. You know everything. So search my heart and you find me. You tell me. You tell me if I really, really love you, if I really mean it. If I'm a coward, if I'm a fraud, if I'm a charlatan, then you search my heart. You're God. You find out if I really love you. It says, you know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. And then Peter becomes one of the most courageous disciples in the Bible. In Acts chapter 4, it says in verse 13, now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated men in common, they were astonished. And we go to verse 21, it says, and when they had further threatened them, Peter and John, they let them go, finding no way to punish them because of God's people. Peter was not a coward. And this is the cool thing. These people that radically saw Jesus rose from the grave became these insane, fearless martyrs. The same ones that scattered when he was taken. The same Peter, who before a girl was a coward, stands up to the Jewish authorities and says, I'm not going to stop preaching Jesus. And then Jesus prophesies his death in John chapter 21. After he reinstates them, he says, Peter, they're going to take you away, brother. They're going to take you away, and it's not going to be good. And you're going to go to a place that you don't want to go, and they're going to stretch out your arms. They're going to put a garment on you. What is he saying? Peter, you're going to be crucified. That's what he was describing. Peter, you couldn't stand up to the girl, but you're going to be crucified. Jesus' brother, James, who didn't believe in Jesus, was skeptical. After the resurrection, he became a bold proclaimer of who Jesus was. His book is in the New Testament. He died a martyr's death at the hands of the chief priests. Every single disciple died a martyr except for one. And this is the one that convinced me. This is the one as a little kid that I was like, this I get. Because I know you don't die for your worthless lies. You don't die for your worthless lies. What does that mean? I was a liar as a kid. I was a liar. That's what I was good at. That was my sin. I would make up stories so people would find me cool. But see, if you caught me in lie and you pressed me and I realized there was no more profit in telling the lie, I would just crack. An example would be this. If I would tell you, hey man, I saw Michael Jordan, me and him shook hands and I slammed on him. Crossed him over like Allen Iverson, broke his ankles and busted one out. It was amazing. I continue that lie. There's no bad thing in that. Right? What do I gain from that? The profit of popularity that I dunked on Jordan. But if you started pressing me to the point of persecution, that you took a gun to my head or to the heads of my children, and you say, Paul, do you know Jordan? Did you cross him over? Did you dunk on him? I would say, no. Because at that point, what's true? That lie is no longer profitable. That lie is worthless. Because I gain nothing. And this is exactly what happened to the disciples. You don't die for your worthless lies. You may die for somebody else's lie, like in 9/11 when those terrorists ran into the building. They were believing somebody else's lie. But these are eyewitnesses. This is their lie. And yet these men, you're telling me, gathered together, made this insane conspiracy, paid off 500 people, all these different things, stole the body and got around. I could just envision Jesus' mutilated body on the table. The disciples say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be tortured. We're going to be beaten. We're going to lose our lives. And our families are going to be killed. We're going to gain absolutely nothing. And everybody that follows us for a century That's 100 years. We'll die. We will gain nothing. Let's tell a lie. I can't buy that. You know why? Because if I was in that room, I'd be like, heck no. I'm out. I'm cutting my losses. You don't die for a worthless lie. And you're telling me that for a century, these men never broke. Do you know why? Because they saw Jesus. They weren't afraid of death because they saw their leader beat death. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean for us? Right? If you're still exploring the things of God, man. If you're a guy, you're like, you know what, Paul, I identify with that idea of doubt. I identify with the idea, I'm just searching the things of God, and you're talking to me about your dad's death, and you're talking to me about your cousin's death and all these things, and you know what, life has punched me in the face, and I don't understand the questions that come up, and all. God's not in the equation yet. If you're in doubt, this is the safest place for you. Do me a favor, don't stay there. Because you're gambling on your life. You can't just mark no opinion on religion. You can't. Because if you die and you're wrong, you're dead wrong. So get the facts. And if you stay here for 3 months, you stay here for 6 months, you stay here for a month, and you're like, Paul, I just can't believe. I'll love you, embrace you, pray for you, but you won't be an outcast. So bring your doubts here. Bring them right here. Investigate. Don't stay in doubt. Don't gamble on the most important question you ever have to ask in your life. Don't do that. If you're a Christian, dude, this is it, man. This is the jackpot. This is it. Jesus beat death. You know what that means for me? It means that young boy confused at a funeral home because we couldn't afford a true burial for my dad. Right? The man that's still afraid to look at my dad's ashes. Right? The confused boy who didn't understand why his cousin was murdered. Death was right there in front of me. Like a Goliath I couldn't beat and I couldn't avoid. A thought always in the back of my mind or at the front of my mind every single day since those events. You know what the resurrection means? You know what the resurrection means? Death is dead to me. It can't hurt me. It can't touch me. It can't take me. Doesn't matter if you take my kid's life, my wife's life, or my life. There's no way I lose this game. I win. The fourth quarter is over. And Jesus Christ has won with a resounding victory. Which means I can have the same exact resolve that the men who pinned this with their blood had. Take my life, I won't deny Jesus Christ. Do you know why? Because you're threatening me with something that's empty. You put that gun to my head, it may have a bullet, but it's empty. Its chamber is empty because that consequence doesn't end me. It frees me. And if you're not sure about the things of God, I know you want that hope. Even if you don't believe it, I know you want it. And if you're a Christian, dude, what else is there to worry about? At Illuminate, we always take a time of response. And the response that we do is about the death of Jesus Christ. And back there you're going to see there's communion, there's juice, and there's bread representing kind of these little crackers. What that represents, it's not just like an appetizer. That is basically us saying Christ, before he died, broke a piece of bread, poured out wine, and said, this is the symbol of my death. But the cool thing about my death is your death, so therefore my life is your life. So when you take the bread, you take the juice, you're symbolically saying, just as Jesus beat death, so do I. That's what you say when you take it. That's awesome. It's called a celebration, a Eucharist. The Thanksgiving meal is what it was called in the New Testament. This is party time. This is better than doing shots at the bar, right? This is real. That's fake. That's shallow. This is a symbol that death can do nothing to Paul Robert Crandall and to you. But if you haven't taken Christ yet, you don't yet know him. If death took you tonight, you would be crippled by it. You would enter into something that to you right now is a mystery. We would ask you, don't take communion yet. Don't take of a symbol until you've taken Christ. And Illuminate, the band's going to come. They're going to play a song. At a time of response, we ask that God, yes, he's spoken to us. Now it's time to talk back to him. So if you're a Christian, you understand the things of God, and you have taken Christ, we ask you, in a time of thoughtfulness, examine yourself, examine the sin in your life, the things that you've fallen short, rejoice in the things that you've succeeded in, and when you take Christ, just take it in thanksgiving. And you could take it, going through the center aisles, just take it, and then give in the offering baskets as you go by, and then go back to your seats, and then sing the song with us. If you're not a Christian, you're not a believer yet, you're still in that doubt phase, but you want to move out of that phase, we offer you, there's some leaders that are going to stand right here during this song. We're not going to force you, we're not going to contrive you, we're not going to make you do anything that you don't want to believe. That's not what we're about. But if that's you tonight and you're like, Paul, I don't want to be in doubt anymore, I want to have certainty that I can beat death, we ask you to come talk to one of these leaders. The best thing that they do here is listen, man. And that's what they're going to do. So Illuminate, this is your chance to respond. Either prayerfully take of communion or come up front as we play the song and speak to a leader.